As the sun dipped lower over the countryside, its golden light cast long shadows across the vast fields of wheat, swaying gently in the cool evening breeze. Willow Creek was quiet, too quiet. On the surface it seemed peaceful, but there was an underlying tension in the air, the kind that signaled an approaching storm. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, their swollen edges tinged with an ominous gray. With a sharp sigh of frustration, Lucas Hayes guided his motorcycle to the side of the empty road. The engine had sputtered and died a few miles back, leaving him stranded just as he reached the crest of the last hill. Now, standing beside the once sleek machine, its metallic sheen dulled by dust, he frowned at his predicament. Raised in the heart of the city, he had little knowledge of fixing such a beast. The first heavy raindrop landed on his cheek as he crouched to inspect the damage. It wasn't just the engine. His chain had slipped loose, hanging lifelessly like an abandoned promise. Running a hand through his disheveled dark hair, he pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. His tailored leather jacket, usually a mark of effortless style, now felt stifling in the thick, humid air. Perfect, he muttered under his breath, his words swallowed by the distant growl of thunder. Leaning against the bike, he narrowed his eyes at the seemingly endless stretch of road ahead. Willow Creek, this sleepy, forgotten corner of the world, suddenly felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. Then the low rumble of an engine broke the silence, a sound both grating and oddly reassuring. Lucas turned just as an old pickup truck rattled into view, its headlights flickering like fireflies against the dimming sky. The vehicle slowed to a stop, and the driver's window rolled down, revealing a woman in her late 20s. Her chestnut hair was hastily pulled back into a messy ponytail, a smudge of grease marking her temple. "You look like you need a hand," she called out, her voice carrying an easy confidence, though her sharp gaze missed nothing. Lucas straightened, brushing dust from his jacket as if to regain some dignity. "That obvious, huh?" The woman's lips curved into a slight smirk. "Let me guess, engine trouble?" "That and the chain," he admitted, motioning toward the tangled mess. "I was hoping to make it to town before the storm really kicks in." Her eyes flicked over him, lingering a second longer than necessary. There was something about his polished boots and precisely cut jacket that didn't belong here. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, tilting her head. "Just passing through," Lucas replied quickly, an almost imperceptible edge of defensiveness in his voice. "Needed a break." "From the city, huh?" she said, nodding toward the motorcycle. "Well, you're not going anywhere on that. Mind if I take a look?" "You know about bikes?" Lucas's surprise was poorly masked, earning him a raised eyebrow from the woman. "Spent my whole life in a garage," she replied, hopping down from the truck. Her boots hit the gravel with a solid thud. "Been fixing engines longer than you've probably been riding them." Lucas blinked, then stepped aside. "Be my guest." The woman crouched beside the bike, her movements precise and practiced. She ran her fingers along the chain first, testing its tension. "Loose sprocket," she muttered. "You're lucky this didn't snap while you were riding. Could have sent you flying." Her words hung in the air, laced with a mix of indifference and quiet warning. She worked quickly, reaching into the bed of her truck and pulling out a well-worn toolbox. Lucas watched, feeling an odd mix of admiration and discomfort. After a moment, she broke the silence. "So what's your name, city boy?" "Lucas," he answered. "And you?" "Mara," she said simply, tightening the chain with a firm twist. "And you might want to consider carrying a basic toolkit if you're planning to wander out here. Not every breakdown comes with this much luck." "I'll keep that in mind," Lucas said, his tone dry. He shoved his hands into his pockets, looking away as Mara glanced up at him, her gaze flickering over his jacket, sharp and assessing. "What kind of work do you do, Lucas?" He hesitated a second too long for her not to notice. "Office stuff. Nothing exciting." Her smirk returned, faint but knowing. "Ugh." Mara straightened, dusting her hands off on her jeans. "Well, office work or not, your bike's good for now. Just don't push it too hard before getting a proper tune-up." Lucas nodded, grateful despite the unspoken tension in her tone. "How much do I owe you?" She waved him off. "Don't worry about it. Just helping out a fellow traveler." As she climbed back into her truck, Lucas called after her. "At least let me buy you dinner sometime." Mara paused, one hand on the wheel. Her green eyes met his, glinting with a mix of amusement and curiosity. Maybe, if you actually make it to town without breaking down again. With that, she drove off, leaving Lucas standing beside his bike as the first real crack of thunder rolled across the open fields. Something about her stuck in his mind as he restarted the engine and rode toward Willow Creek, the storm close at his heels. The bell above the diner door jingled as Lucas stepped inside, the warm scent of coffee and fried food wrapping around him like a familiar embrace. Willow Creek Diner was small and unassuming, its checkered floor scuffed from years of passing boots and sneakers. The booths were worn but inviting, their faded cushions bearing the weight of countless late-night conversations. A handful of patrons lingered over plates of pie, their quiet chatter blending with the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Lucas scanned the room, and then he saw her. Mara was perched at the counter, one boot hooked on the rung of her stool, her elbow propped lazily on the counter as she flipped through a dog-eared magazine. She looked just as at ease here as she had on the side of the road, her hair still pulled back, the faint smudge of grease at her temple barely noticeable. A faint smudge of grease clung to her t-shirt, a quiet reminder of the work she had been doing before landing here. Lucas hesitated for a brief moment, wondering if he was overstepping, but the memory of her sharp wit and effortless competence pulled him forward. The seat beside her suddenly felt like the only place in the room worth sitting. "City boy," Mara said without looking up, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Lost again?" Lucas chuckled as he slid onto the stool next to her. "Not this time. Figured I'd try the local cuisine before heading back." Mara closed the magazine she had been flipping through, her green eyes meeting his. "This your idea of a 5-star meal? Depends. What's the special?" She smirked, leaning back slightly. "Meatloaf. Edible, if you're lucky." He grinned, signaling the waitress. "I'll take my chances." The waitress jotted down his order and wordlessly refilled Mara's chipped coffee mug before walking away. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the hum of the diner filling the space between them. Lucas stole a glance at her, noting how effortlessly she fit into the scene, like this place was a part of her, stitched into her very being. It was a feeling he had never quite had anywhere. "So," he began, folding his hands on the counter, "what does a small-town mechanic do for fun?" Mara let out a quiet snort. "Fun's a luxury. Between the garage and keeping my dad out of trouble, there's not much time for it." "Your dad?" he prompted, genuinely curious. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her expression softening just slightly. "Russell? He owns the garage. Taught me everything I know. These days, though." She trailed off, absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her mug. "He's not as spry as he used to be. I've been running the place more and more." "Sounds like a lot to handle," Lucas said, keeping his tone light, though the weight of her words lingered between them. "It is," she admitted, but there was no self-pity in her voice. "But it's home. It's what we do." Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the fading sunlight stretched long shadows across the parking lot. "Willow Creek might not look like much, but it's got heart. People here take care of each other. It's why I stayed, I guess." Lucas followed her gaze, letting her words settle. He could feel the quiet pride she carried for this town, for its people, for the life she had built here. It was a foreign concept to him, this sense of belonging, of rootedness, but something about it felt steady, solid. "And you?" Mara asked, turning her attention back to him. "What's your story, city boy? What's so bad about the big city that you had to escape out here?" The question was casual, but there was a quiet curiosity beneath it. Lucas hesitated, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "Just needed a break," he said vaguely. "Work's been intense." Mara raised an eyebrow. "What kind of work?" "Office stuff. Normal. Boring, emails, spreadsheets, meetings, nothing exciting." She studied him for a moment, tilting her head slightly as if trying to see past his carefully chosen words. "Huh," she said finally, her tone unreadable. "Doesn't sound like something that would drive a guy to the middle of nowhere." Lucas chuckled, deflecting. "Maybe I just like the scenery." Her smirk returned, but she didn't press further. "Well, enjoy it while you can. Willow Creek isn't exactly buzzing with excitement, but it grows on you." The conversation drifted into lighter topics, her favorite hiking trails, the best pie in town, the odd quirks of small-town life. Lucas found himself laughing more than he had in months, the careful walls of his usual persona loosening in her presence. When his food arrived, Mara slid off her stool, tossing a few bills onto the counter. "Guess I'll see you around, city boy," she said, her voice teasing but warm. "Count on it," Lucas replied, watching as she strolled toward the door, her boots clicking softly against the tiles. The bell jingled as she disappeared into the night, leaving behind the faint scent of motor oil and coffee. A strange sense of loss settled over him. He absently poked at his meatloaf, barely registering the taste. His mind was elsewhere, replaying their conversation, tracing the sharp edges of her wit and the easy confidence in her voice. Mara was different, grounded, unfiltered, entirely herself. A stark contrast to the polished, calculated people he was used to. Lucas wondered if the version of himself he had shown her was enough to hold her interest, or if the truth he kept buried would eventually undo whatever had begun to form between them. Outside, the streetlights of Willow Creek flickered to life, casting a soft glow onto the quiet pavement. Lucas stepped out of the diner, taking in the stillness of the small town. The meatloaf had been forgettable, but the company had been anything but. His gaze drifted to his motorcycle, its engine repaired, yet his thoughts were anything but settled. The idea of heading back to the city felt suffocating. The endless skyscrapers, the constant demands, none of it felt as appealing as it once had. Change of plans? The familiar voice pulled him from his thoughts. Across the parking lot, Mara leaned casually against her truck, arms crossed, a slight smirk playing at her lips. Lucas hesitated, caught between the impulse to leave and the undeniable pull she seemed to have on him. Finally, he shrugged, decided to take the scenic route before heading back. She tilted her head, her expression hovering between amusement and skepticism. "Scenic, huh? There's not much to see once it gets dark." "Then I guess I'm lucky I ran into the local expert," he replied, taking a few steps toward her. "Care to give me a tour?" Mara rolled her eyes but pushed off the truck and climbed in. "Follow me, city boy. Let's see if you can keep up." The drive was short but winding, the roads narrowing as the trees thickened. Lucas kept his eyes on Mara's taillights, the hum of his motorcycle steady against the backdrop of chirping crickets. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. When they finally stopped, it was at a small gravel lot near a barely visible trailhead. Mara was already out of her truck, a flashlight in hand. "Come on," she said, nodding toward the darkened path. "This way." Lucas dismounted and fell into step beside her. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dirt trail ahead. The forest was alive with quiet sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl. Mara walked with a quiet confidence, her boots crunching against the path. "This is where I come when I need to clear my head," she said after a few moments, her voice softer than usual. "Not much, but it gets the job done." As they emerged from the trees, Lucas understood what she meant. The overlook stretched wide before them, offering a breathtaking view of Willow Creek below. The town twinkled in the distance, its lights scattered like fireflies against the dark landscape. Above them, the stars burned bright, far more vivid than in the city, where the glow of artificial light dulled their brilliance. The air was still, heavy with the kind of quiet that made the world feel both vast and intimate at once. "It's beautiful," Lucas murmured, genuinely taken aback. Mara leaned against the weathered wooden railing, arms resting on the smooth surface. "It's home," she said simply. "Not perfect, but it has its moments." Lucas joined her, the cool night air brushing against his skin. "I can see why you stayed." Mara glanced at him, her eyes thoughtful. Then, after a pause, she asked, "And you, what are you running from?" The question sliced through the silence with an unsettling precision. Lucas hesitated, his fingers tightening around the railing. Lucas tightened his grip on the railing. "Who says I'm running?" he countered, attempting a lightness that didn't quite land. Mara didn't press him for an answer, but the weight of her silence was undeniable. "You don't have to tell me," she said after a moment, "but whatever it is, it's following you. People don't just show up in places like Willow Creek without a reason." Lucas exhaled, the tightness in his chest growing. He stared out at the town below, the glow of the streetlights flickering like distant stars. "I wanted space," he admitted finally. "A chance to breathe." Mara nodded, her expression softening. Well, you found it. They stood together in the quiet, the sounds of the night filling the spaces between their words. Lucas found himself glancing at Mara out of the corner of his eye. The way her hair caught the faint starlight, the way her shoulders seemed more at ease here, as if the weight of the world couldn't touch her in this place. She was everything his life wasn't: grounded, unpretentious, real. "You're lucky," he murmured, "to have all this." Mara smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Lucky is one way to put it, but it's not always easy. Running the garage, looking after my dad, sometimes it feels like there's not much room left for me. Lucas studied her face, the quiet honesty in her words settling deep. "Then why do you do it?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Because it's worth it," she said, her voice steady. "This town, my dad, the people here, they're worth it. And when you find something worth holding on to, you don't let go, no matter how hard it gets." Her words hit Lucas harder than he expected, guilt twisting deep in his chest. The version of himself he had shown her, a man on a motorcycle, escaping the grind, wasn't entirely a lie. But it wasn't the full truth either. And here she was, offering him a glimmer self, trusting him in a way he wasn't sure he deserved. "I admire that," he whispered. Mara glanced at him, a small, genuine smile curving her lips. "Thanks, city boy." As they turned to leave, the path back to their vehicles felt longer, the silence between them heavier. Lucas's thoughts churned, the weight of his secret pressing harder with each step. He couldn't shake the feeling that when the truth finally surfaced, inevitable and unforgiving, it would change everything. The cafe was quiet, the low hum of conversation blending with the occasional clink of coffee cups. Lucas stirred his tea absently, his gaze settling on Mara as she leaned back in her chair. The warm glow of the overhead lights softened her features, and for a fleeting moment, he forgot about the unease gnawing at him. "This place has character," he said, gesturing toward the framed photos lining the cafe's walls, snapshots of Willow Creek through the years, its people, its moments frozen in time. Mara smirked. "That's a polite way of saying it's old." He shook his head. "No, it feels lived in, like it's part of something bigger." She tilted her head, watching him with quiet amusement. "You have a way with words, city boy. Makes me wonder what you actually do for a living." Lucas's heart stumbled. He leaned back, forcing a grin. "Told you. Office stuff. Nothing exciting." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she wasn't quite buying it. But before she could press further, the cafe's television flickered, catching both their attention. The volume was low but clear, the smooth voice of a news anchor carrying through the room. And in business news, Hayes Corporation CEO Lucas Hayes has finalized the acquisition of Vance Tech Industries, solidifying his position as one of the country's leading entrepreneurs. The words hit like a punch to the gut. The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. His gaze snapped to the television screen, where his own face, polished, corporate, unmistakable, filled the frame. The air in the cafe thickened, heavy with unspoken truths. Across from him, Mara sat frozen, her eyes locked onto the screen. The image shifted to a press conference. Lucas in a sharp suit, shaking hands with executives, flashing a practiced smile that belonged to another world. Lucas Calloway could not be reached for comment, the anchor continued smoothly. But sources suggest this acquisition will reshape the industry and further cement Calloway Holdings as a dominant force in the market. The cafe's television abruptly clicked off, the barista muttering an apology for the noise. But the silence that followed was far louder, stretching between them like a canyon. Mara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Calloway Holdings," she said slowly, her voice quiet but edged with steel. "That's you." Lucas swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around his teacup. "Mara, let me explain." She cut him off, her chair scraping against the floor as she stood. "Explain what, exactly? That you've been lying to me since the moment we met?" "I wasn't lying," he said quickly, rising to his feet. "I just what?" Her voice sharpened, drawing the attention of a few lingering patrons. She didn't seem to care. Decided to pretend to be someone else? To what? Play the role of the mysterious wanderer while secretly scouting my town for some business deal? His stomach sank. "That's not it at all." "Then what is it?" she demanded, her eyes burning with betrayal. "Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like you're just another rich guy who thinks he can roll into town, throw some money around, and take whatever he wants. Mara, I would never. He reached for her, but she stepped back, her movements stiff, her face a mask of hurt. Her voice cracked as she spoke. People like you show up full of promises, and when you're done playing pretend, you leave the rest of us behind to deal with the fallout. I thought you were different. I am different, Lucas insisted, his own voice rising now. Everything I told you about needing space, about wanting something real, it was true. But you left out the part where you're a multi-millionaire CEO, she shot back, her laughter bitter. Kind of an important detail, don't you think? Lucas faltered, the weight of her accusation pressing down on him. I didn't want that to define how you saw me, he said quietly. I wanted you to know me first. Mara let out a sharp exhale, shaking her head. Well, congratulations, she said, her voice cutting. I know you now. She turned on her heel and strode toward the door, her boots striking the floor with purpose. Lucas's pulse pounded as he followed a few steps behind. Mara, please, he called after her. Let me make this right. She paused at the threshold, one hand on the door. For a fleeting second, he thought she might turn back. But when she spoke, her voice was cold. You want to make it right? She said, still not looking at him. Leave my town alone, and leave me alone. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped into the cool evening air, her boots hitting the pavement with a force that mirrored the storm of emotions inside her. Lucas followed, his voice softer now but just as urgent. Mara, please. Before he could say more, the sound of an approaching car cut through the tension. A sleek black sedan pulled up at the curb, its tinted windows gleaming under the streetlights. The door swung open, and a woman in a crisp blazer stepped out, her expression unreadable. The woman stepped out of the sleek black sedan, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her polished presence was jarringly out of place against the quiet charm of Willow Creek's streets. Mr. Calloway, she said, her eyes flicking briefly to Mara before locking onto Lucas. You're behind schedule. The Syntech acquisition requires your signature by morning. She paused, her gaze shifting toward the motorcycle parked nearby, her tone laced with quiet confusion. You arrived here on that? Mara stiffened, her chest tightening. She didn't need to hear the rest, she could already feel the invisible line being drawn between them, sharp and impenetrable. Clara, Lucas said quickly, frustration creeping into his voice. Not now. Clara hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Of course, sir. I'll wait in the car. Mara turned to Lucas, her jaw tight, her voice low and unsteady. Your assistant, your business deals, your fancy cars, it all fits, doesn't it? She let out a bitter laugh. And here I thought you might actually belong in a place like this. Mara, it's not like that, Lucas said, stepping toward her, his hands raised in a plea. I never meant... You never meant for me to find out? She cut in, her voice sharp. Well, I did, and now it's painfully clear just how different we are. She didn't wait for a reply. Instead, she turned and strode toward her truck, leaving Lucas standing there, frozen, watching helplessly as she disappeared into the night. The wrench hit the concrete floor with a loud clang, echoing through the garage. Mara muttered a curse under her breath, shaking out her hand after the misstep. The afternoon sun filtered through the wide-open doors, catching the dust motes swirling lazily in the air. Outside, the faint hum of townsfolk talking drifted in with the breeze. But inside, the space was thick with tension. Mara focused with razor-sharp precision. Every bolt tightened, every smudge wiped clean, every engine tuned with a meticulousness that left no room for wandering thoughts. She welcomed the distraction. The rhythmic grind of her tools drowned out the storm inside her. The questions she refused to ask, the anger still simmering days after that night in the cafe. Her father, Russell, shuffled in from the office, his steps slower than they used to be. You've been at it for hours, he said, his voice gruff but laced with quiet concern. Take a break, Em. I'm fine, she answered curtly, not looking up from the carburetor in her hands. Russell sighed, leaning against the workbench. This about that city boy? Mara's fingers stiffened, but she said nothing. She felt his gaze on her, heavy, knowing, before he finally retreated back into the office. Once alone, she exhaled sharply, setting the carburetor down with more force than necessary. Meanwhile, In Chicago, Lucas sat in his penthouse, the floor-to-ceiling windows stretching out to an endless view of the city skyline. The dazzling lights of the metropolis once thrilled him. Now they felt hollow, lifeless. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the dim glow of the room. His phone buzzed again. Another missed call from Clara. No doubt about the Syntec deal. He ignored it, just as he had ignored everything else since returning from Willow Creek. Instead, his mind kept circling back to Mara. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her town, the warmth in her laugh, the fire in her gaze when she realized who he was. He had thought he was protecting something fragile. Lucas had been holding on to something fragile, something real in a way he hadn't experienced in years. But now, all he could see was the wreckage of his choices. "Sir?" A hesitant voice from the doorway pulled him from his thoughts. Clara stood there, tablet in hand, her usual composure tinged with uncertainty. "You have a meeting in an hour," she said carefully. "And there's something else. Thomas Price is requesting an update on the Willow Creek project." At the mention of the town, Lucas's head snapped up. "What project?" Clara shifted uncomfortably. "Thomas has been looking into acquiring some properties there. He believes it's a promising location for a new manufacturing site." Lucas stood abruptly, the glass in his hand slipping from his grasp and hitting the counter with a dull thud. "No," he said, his voice low but firm. "Tell him I want nothing to do with it. I'll handle this personally." Clara nodded quickly and left, sensing the weight in the room. Lucas rubbed his temples, the pieces falling into place. Thomas had been eyeing Willow Creek for a while, but in the chaos of the merger, it had slipped under his radar. Now, Lucas was certain Thomas wouldn't hesitate to use any leverage he could find, including Mara. The low hum of a sleek black car broke the quiet of the morning. Mara glanced up from under the hood of an old pickup, her brow furrowing as the unfamiliar vehicle rolled into the garage lot. It stood out like a sore thumb, its glossy finish almost offensive against the backdrop of oil-stained concrete and rusted tools. Then, the driver's door swung open, and the man who stepped out was even more unexpected. Dressed in an immaculate suit, Thomas Price exuded a controlled confidence that immediately set Mara on edge. He adjusted his tie, his sharp features twisting into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Caldwell," he said smoothly, his gaze sweeping over the garage with an air of detached curiosity. "What a charming little operation you've got here." Mara straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. "Can I help you?" Thomas's smile widened. "I believe you can. I'm here to discuss an opportunity, one that could be quite lucrative for you and your father." She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "We're not interested." "You haven't even heard my offer," he replied, unfazed. "My company is looking to invest in this area. Of course, that means progress, new infrastructure, jobs, growth." Mara's eyes narrowed. "And by progress, you mean tearing down half the town?" Thomas's expression hardened for a fraction of a second before his easy smile returned. "Let's not be dramatic. I'm simply proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement. Your garage sits on prime real estate, valuable for both of us." Mara took a step closer, her voice low and steady. "This garage is more than just real estate. It's my family's livelihood, and it's not for sale." Thomas tilted his head slightly, studying her as if weighing his next move. "I'd think carefully about that, Miss Caldwell. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Before she could respond, another engine rumbled into the lot. Mara's breath caught. She knew that sound. A motorcycle pulled in, its familiar presence sending a jolt through her. Lucas stepped off, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his expression stormy as his eyes locked onto Thomas. "What are you doing here, Price?" His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Thomas turned slowly, his practiced smile faltering for the first time. "Just a friendly business visit." Lucas took a step forward, placing himself between Thomas and Mara, his stance unmistakably protective. "Stay away from this town, and from her." Mara stared at him, her heart pounding. "Miss Caldwell," one of them called, his voice cold and formal. "We're here on behalf of Mr. Price. He'd like you to reconsider his offer." Mara straightened, masking the unease curling in her stomach. "I already told him. We're not interested. You're wasting your time." The man took a slow step closer, his thin smile never reaching his eyes. Let's not make this difficult. Mr. Price is quite insistent, and we wouldn't want things to get unpleasant. Russell appeared in the doorway, his weathered face hardening at the sight before him. You heard her, he said firmly. We're not selling, now get off our property before I call the sheriff. The lead man let out a low, humorless chuckle, glancing back at his associates. The sheriff can't stop progress, old man. You'd be wise to step aside. Mara's jaw tightened. She was about to fire back when the deep growl of an approaching engine cut through the rising tension. The moment Lucas pulled into the gravel lot, a cold jolt ran down his spine. Two burly men in dark clothing stood in the center of the garage, their sheer size casting long shadows in the fading light. Russell stood his ground, his arms crossed, but there was tension in his stance. Nearby, Mara stood between her father and the men, her expression a careful balance of defiance and unease. Lucas didn't think, he just reacted. He killed the engine and stepped out of the car, his voice slicing through the dusk like a blade. What's going on here? The larger of the two men turned at the sound of Lucas's voice, his expression shifting to mild annoyance. Who's this? He asked, jerking a thumb toward Lucas. Doesn't matter. Mara snapped, stepping forward. You've delivered your message. Now get out. The man chuckled, the sound grating against the stillness of the evening. We're just having a friendly chat. No harm in that, is there? Lucas stepped forward, his jaw tight. I'd say there's plenty of harm in threatening people on their own property. The man's demeanor darkened, irritation flickering in his eyes. We don't want trouble. Then leave, Lucas said, his voice steady but firm. He moved to stand beside Mara, his presence a silent shield. Or what? The second man sneered, stepping forward. Before Lucas could respond, the situation erupted. One of the men grabbed Lucas by the jacket, yanking him backward. Instinct took over. Lucas swung hard, his fist connecting with the man's jaw in a solid, satisfying thud. Chaos. Mara shouted something, but it was drowned out by the scuffle. Russell lunged forward to intervene, but the other man shoved him back. Lucas, outnumbered and unarmed, held his ground. He was quick but untrained. A blow landed squarely against his ribs, sending him stumbling. Stop it. Mara's voice cracked as she grabbed a wrench from the workbench. She swung it in the air, her desperation evident. I said stop. The men hesitated, their eyes darting between her and Lucas, who was crumpled on the ground, struggling to rise. One of them muttered something about it not being worth the trouble. With a final glare, they stepped back. This isn't over, one of them spat, his gaze lingering on Mara before they retreated to their car. The tires spun against the gravel as they sped off, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Mara dropped the wrench, her breath coming in short gasps. She turned to Lucas, who was attempting to sit up, wincing with every movement. You idiot, she muttered, dropping to her knees beside him. What were you thinking? Lucas looked up at her, his face pale but determined. I was thinking they weren't going to hurt you or Russell. Mara's chest tightened as she took in the sight of him. His disheveled hair, the blood at the corner of his lip, the way he refused to let the pain show. She wanted to yell at him, to push him away, to pull him closer, closer. Instead, she forced her voice steady. Can you stand? With some help, he admitted, managing a weak smile. Mara slipped an arm under him, helping him to his feet. Russell hurried over, his face lined with worry. Inside, Mara said firmly. Now. As they guided Lucas into the garage, her mind raced. The way he had thrown himself into the fight without hesitation, the way he had stood between her and those men. It had unsettled her. But the anger she still carried, the betrayal she hadn't let go of, tangled with something else. Something she didn't know how to name. For the first time, she wasn't sure where to place him. The man she couldn't trust, or the man who had risked everything to protect her. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the small hospital room. The rhythmic beeping of a monitor punctuated the stillness. Lucas lay on the bed, his face pale but composed, a bandage wrapped tightly around his ribs. Mara sat by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the parking lot below. She hadn't spoken much since they arrived. Her emotions twisted. Anger, guilt, and something else. Something she wasn't ready to face. Mara refused to name the feeling pressing at the edges of her mind. Softer, unfamiliar, and unwelcome. The door creaked open and Russell stepped in, a styrofoam cup of coffee in hand. "You should get some rest, Em," he said gruffly, setting the cup on the windowsill. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. Russell gave her a long look but didn't argue. Instead, he turned to Lucas, whose eyes fluttered open at the sound of their voices. "How's the hero doing?" Russell asked, his tone dry but not unkind. Lucas exhaled, trying to manage a small smile. "Seen better days, but it was worth it." Mara shot him a glance but said nothing. The weight between them was thick, the silence stretching like a storm cloud. Before anyone could speak again, the door swung open once more. A poised woman stepped inside, her silver-streaked hair impeccably styled, her tailored coat pristine despite the late hour. Mara recognized her instantly from press photos. Helen Calloway. Helen's eyes swept across the room, her gaze settling on Mara and Russell. "I'm Helen," she introduced herself, her voice warm but steady. "Lucas's mother. I came as soon as I heard." Mara's throat tightened, but before she could react, Russell spoke first. "Helen," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of something unspoken. Helen's polished composure faltered just slightly as she turned toward him. "Russell." An invisible thread seemed to stretch between them, pulling at memories neither had expected to revisit. Mara, sensing the shift, glanced between them, her curiosity piqued. But before she could speak, a nurse appeared in the doorway, addressing Helen. "You can see him now, Mrs. Calloway." Helen hesitated for a brief moment, her eyes lingering on Russell before she nodded and followed the nurse out of the room. Later, Mara excused herself to get coffee, leaving Russell alone in the waiting room. Moments later, Helen returned. She hesitated before sitting beside him, the silence stretching taut between them. "It's been a long time," Helen finally said, her voice quiet. Russell nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to be here," she admitted. "But Lucas, he's always been stubborn, just like his father." Russell's lips twitched with the ghost of a smile. "Seems like he got more than that from you." The silence deepened, filled with years of distance, of things left unsaid. Finally, Helen turned to him, her expression softening. "I heard about your wife. I'm sorry." Russell nodded, his voice gruff. "She was a good woman. Your husband?" Helen looked away, twisting her hands in her lap. "It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but we made it work for Lucas." Regret hung between them, thick and unspoken. Helen exhaled slowly as if releasing a burden she had carried for years. "I never wanted to leave, you know." Russell glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "But you did." "Yes," she whispered, "and I've lived with that choice every day." The weight of their past lingered in the air, raw and unfiltered, the kind of honesty that only came when the past could no longer be ignored. Helen straightened slightly, her voice gaining strength. "But we're not here to talk about us. We're here for them." Russell frowned slightly. "Mara?" Helen nodded. "She reminds me of you, stubborn, determined, and too proud for her own good." Russell let out a soft chuckle. "Sounds about right." Helen's expression shifted, something thoughtful settling in her eyes. Helen's expression turned serious. "If Lucas cares for her, and it's clear that he does, I don't want them to make the same mistakes we did. They deserve better." Russell leaned back, his gaze distant. "They'll figure it out, or they won't. That's up to them." Helen smiled faintly, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Maybe. But I've learned that sometimes a little push in the right direction can make all the difference." Unbeknownst to them, Mara stood just around the corner, a forgotten cup of coffee cooling in her hand. She hadn't meant to overhear, but the quiet intensity of their conversation had rooted her in place. Their words stirred something deep within her, a mixture of understanding and a newfound respect for the burdens people carried, often in silence. As she stepped back into the waiting room, her mind raced. Whatever came next wouldn't just be about mending what was broken. It would be about learning how to build something new. Together. The hospital room was quieter now. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a steady reminder of the life within its walls. Mara perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The tension from the night's events hadn't disappeared, but something in the room had shifted since Helen's visit. It was as though the air itself had softened, making space for the unspoken words that lingered between her and Lucas. Lucas stirred, his eyes fluttering open to find Mara watching him. Her gaze was cautious, guarded, but the concern beneath her furrowed brow was unmistakable. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Mara shrugged, her expression neutral. "Someone has to make sure you don't do something stupid again." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Fair enough." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything left unsaid. Finally, Lucas spoke. "I owe you an explanation," he began, his tone low but firm. "About everything." Mara leaned back slightly, her arms crossing over her chest. "You've had plenty of chances to explain," she said, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. "I know." His admission was quiet. "And I've handled this all wrong." He exhaled, running a hand through his tousled hair. "I thought if I could just be someone else for a little while, someone simpler, maybe I could figure out what I really wanted." He hesitated. "I didn't expect to meet you. And when I did, I panicked." Mara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Panic made you lie?" Lucas winced, not just from the accusation, but from the truth of it. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd see me the way everyone else does, through the lens of my name, my money, my company. I didn't want that, not with you." Mara studied him, her expression unreadable. "And what did you want?" Lucas met her gaze, his own steady despite the vulnerability in his voice. "I wanted to be someone you could trust, someone you could see as more than just all the baggage I come with." Mara's chest tightened at his words, though she kept her face composed. "Trust doesn't come easy, Lucas, especially not when you start things off with lies." "I know." His voice was quiet. "But I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn it. I don't want to lose this, lose you." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but the scars of betrayal weren't so easily soothed. "It's not that simple." "It's not that simple," Mara murmured, her gaze dropping to her hands. Before Lucas could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Helen stepped inside, her expression warm but purposeful. "Am I interrupting?" Mara shook her head, grateful for the reprieve. "No, I was just about to step out." As she moved toward the door, Helen reached out, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Mara," she said softly, her eyes kind, "sometimes we have to let go of the past to make room for what's ahead. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Mara hesitated, her gaze flicking between Helen and Lucas. Finally, she nodded and slipped out of the room, leaving them alone. Helen pulled a chair closer to Lucas's bedside, her demeanor shifting, maternal, yet firm. "You've made quite a mess of things, haven't you?" she said, though there was no malice in her tone. Lucas sighed. "You could say that." Helen reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "She's a good woman, Lucas. Strong, stubborn, and full of heart. Don't let your pride ruin this." "I'm trying," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I don't know if it's enough." Helen placed a reassuring hand over his. "Then don't waste time feeling sorry for yourself. Fix it." Lucas's brow furrowed. "It's not that simple." "Love rarely is," Helen said, her voice tinged with an emotion that made Lucas look at her more closely. "But it's worth it. Don't make the mistake of letting fear dictate your choices. I did that once, and I've spent years wondering what might have been." Lucas hesitated, the weight of her words settling over him. "You mean Russell?" Helen's eyes clouded, a mixture of regret and acceptance passing through them. "Yes, we had something good once, but life pulled us apart." She exhaled softly. "Don't let that happen to you and Mara." Her words lingered, echoing in the quiet room. Lucas nodded slowly, sinking back against the pillows. There was still so much to say, so much to fix, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Out in the hallway, Mara leaned against the wall, Helen's words turning over in her mind. Maybe letting go wasn't about forgetting or forgiving all at once. Maybe it was about stepping forward, one truth at a time. And maybe, just maybe, Lucas deserved the chance to take that step with her. In the weeks that followed, the tension in Willow Creek had only grown. The town hall was packed to capacity, its modest space barely containing the anxious energy in the room. Residents murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of frustration and hope as they waited for the meeting to begin. At the front of the room, Mara sat beside her father, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The tension in her posture mirrored that of the entire town. Lucas entered quietly, his ribs still sore, but his determination unshaken. His presence caused a ripple through the crowd. Low murmurs, curious glances. Mara caught the whispers but kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Lucas approached the front of the hall, his steps measured, his face set with purpose. Thomas Price was already seated beside his attorney, a confident smirk playing on his lips. His posture exuded certainty. He believed the outcome of this meeting was already decided. Lucas's jaw tightened at the sight. At the podium, the mayor, a weary man with a kind face, cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss Mr. Price's proposal for the industrial development of Willow Creek, the mayor began, his voice steady but strained, and to address any concerns the community might have. Thomas Price was the first to stand, his tone as smooth as silk. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, flashing his signature, practiced smile. This project represents progress, jobs, infrastructure, a brighter future for Willow Creek. I understand that change is difficult, but it is necessary for growth. Murmurs of dissent rippled through the crowd, tension thick in the air. Beside her father, Mara's fists clenched at her sides. Before Thomas could continue, Lucas rose to his feet, his voice cutting through the noise. With all due respect, Mr. Price, Lucas said, his tone calm but commanding. Your version of progress comes at the expense of this town's heart and its people. Thomas's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. And who are you to speak on behalf of Willow Creek? Lucas met his gaze without flinching. I'm someone who's seen the damage that men like you leave behind, he replied. Someone who's watched so-called progress strip away everything that makes a place like this worth living in. But this time, we're not going to let that happen. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, his voice carrying through the hall. I have here proof of Mr. Price's unethical practices, false appraisals, manipulated contracts, and illegal coercion tactics. These documents have already been submitted to the state attorney's office. If this project moves forward, legal action will follow. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Thomas's expression darkened, his carefully crafted facade beginning to crack. He stood abruptly, his voice sharp. You have no authority here, Calloway. No, Lucas admitted, his eyes unwavering. But the people of Willow Creek do, and they deserve to know the truth. The mayor took the documents, scanning them with a furrowed brow. He exhaled slowly, then looked up, his voice steady. Mr. Price, these allegations are serious. Until they are fully investigated, this project is suspended. A wave of relief surged through the room, cheers and applause breaking out among the residents. Thomas glared at Lucas, his jaw tight. You'll regret this, he hissed before storming out, his attorney trailing behind him. Lucas barely watched him go. His gaze was searching for only one person, Mara. She stood near the front, staring at him, her eyes filled with disbelief, but also something softer, something uncertain. Slowly, she stepped forward as the crowd faded into the background around them. Why did you do it? She asked quietly, her voice carrying both curiosity and caution. Lucas hesitated for only a moment, then exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Because it was the right thing to do, he said simply. Then, softer. And because I needed you to see that I'm not just the man who lied to you, Mara. I'm the man who wants to make things right. The walls she had so carefully built, weeks of betrayal, doubt, and guarded emotions began to crack. You didn't have to do this for me, she said. I didn't, Lucas admitted. I did it for this town, for your dad, for everything you fought to protect. He paused, his voice dropping even lower. But mostly, I did it because I care about you more than I ever thought possible. Mara's gaze flickered, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger, relief, and something else. Something she wasn't ready to name. But as she looked around the room, at the relieved faces of her neighbors, her father's quiet smile, and then back at the man standing before her, something shifted. She inhaled deeply before meeting Lucas's gaze. You still have a lot to prove, she said, her voice steady but not unkind. Lucas nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in weeks, Mara allowed herself to hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could face what came next together. The late afternoon sun bathed Willow Creek's overlook in a golden light, the horizon painted in hues of orange and pink. Mara stood near the edge, her arms resting on the weathered wooden railing. Below, the town stretched out like a patchwork quilt of rooftops and winding streets, peaceful, steady, unassuming. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine and earth, mingling with the faint hum of distant cicadas. She heard the crunch of gravel behind her and didn't need to turn to know it was Lucas. His footsteps were slower than usual, still careful from his injuries, but steady, determined. "I figured you'd be here," he said softly, stepping beside her. "It's my spot," Mara replied, her voice even but lacking its usual sharpness. For a moment they stood in silence, the view filling the space between them. Lucas was the first to break it. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for giving me the chance to prove I'm more than my mistakes." Mara turned to him, her gaze steady but softer now. "You've done more than I thought you would," she admitted. "You fought for this town, for the people here, for my dad. That means something." "I'd do it again," Lucas said, his voice earnest. "For you, for your family, for everything this town stands for. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out what really matters." Mara's lips quirked into the faintest of smiles. "You're starting to sound like a Willow Creek local." He chuckled lightly, leaning against the railing beside her. Maybe there's something to this small-town life after all. The humor in his tone made her relax, just a little, but the weight of their past still lingered between them. "I'm not saying I'm ready to forget everything," she said, cautious. "But I'm starting to see that maybe, just maybe, you're not the man I thought you were." Lucas looked at her, sincerity shining in his gaze. "I don't want you to forget," he said. "I just want a chance to prove I can be better. For you. For us." Mara held his gaze for a long moment, searching for cracks, for any hint of insincerity, but all she found was honesty. She exhaled, the last of her walls beginning to crumble. "All right," she said finally, "let's take it slow." A relieved smile broke across Lucas's face, and for the first time, Mara felt something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. Fragile, but real. Back at the garage, Russell and Helen stood near the open doors, the setting sun casting long shadows across the space. Russell leaned against the frame, arms crossed, while Helen adjusted her scarf, her expression contemplative. "Feels strange," Russell mused, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Seeing you back here." Helen smiled faintly. "It feels strange for me too, but it's nice." They lapsed into a comfortable silence, the years of distance between them softened by shared memories and mutual respect. Finally, Helen turned to him, her eyes warm. "We made our choices, Russell, and I think we both did the best we could." Russell nodded, his gaze distant. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean I don't wonder sometimes." Helen's smile grew wistful. "Me too, but that's why I want Lucas and Mara to have a better chance. No regrets, no what-ifs, just happiness." Russell glanced at her, a flicker of gratitude passing across his weathered features. "They're stubborn, both of them, but maybe they'll figure it out." Helen's voice was firm. "They will." She glanced toward the fading sunlight. "Because this time, they have people like us to push them in the right direction." Russell chuckled. "Well, don't push too hard. Mara's not exactly." "She's not exactly one to be pushed around," Russell said with a smirk. Helen laughed softly, the sound carrying into the warm evening air. "Neither is Lucas. But maybe that's why they'll figure it out, together." Later that evening, Mara and Lucas returned to the garage. The soft light from inside spilled onto the gravel lot, casting a warm glow. Russell greeted them with a knowing smile, while Helen stood nearby, her expression proud. As Mara stepped inside, she glanced back at Lucas, who lingered for a moment. His gaze swept over the scene. The hum of the garage, the easy laughter of neighbors, the quiet strength of the woman he was slowly beginning to win back. For the first time, it wasn't the grandeur of skyscrapers or the weight of corporate boardrooms that filled him with purpose. It was this. He took a deep breath and followed her inside, ready to face whatever came next. Together. That weekend, the garage buzzed with life. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the space. Strings of lights hung from the rafters, casting a golden glow over the celebration. Tables laden with food and drinks were scattered throughout, and a small band played cheerful tunes in the corner. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect. Authentically Willow Creek. The entire community had gathered, not just to celebrate the garage's revitalization, but the town's victory against Thomas Price. Russell moved through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging gruff but heartfelt thanks with neighbors. Helen stood near the refreshments table, her polished presence softened by a genuine smile as she engaged in conversation. Even she seemed surprised by how at home she felt here. Near the open bay doors, Mara stood with her hands on her hips, taking it all in. The sight of familiar faces mingling, her father's quiet pride, the bustling energy of a garage that had once been on the brink of ruin, it filled her with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. You've done something incredible here. Lucas's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing there, dressed casually, but somehow still looking slightly out of place amidst the grease-streaked crowd. Yet, his expression was one of belonging. He held out 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one to her. "Thanks," she said, taking the glass. "But this was a team effort." Lucas shook his head, his gaze steady. "It wouldn't have happened without you. You're the heart of this place." Mara felt a warmth rise in her cheeks. She quickly looked away. "Don't start getting sentimental on me, city boy." Lucas chuckled, but his voice softened. "I mean it, Mara. You've made me see things differently. You've made me think about what really matters." She met his eyes, and for once, she didn't feel the need to guard her emotions. "You've proven a lot, Lucas, not just to me, to everyone here." They stood in comfortable silence, the music and laughter swirling around them. Then Mara tilted her head toward the open bay doors. "Come on, I think we've earned a little quiet." The overlook was as breathtaking as ever, the town twinkling below like a constellation in miniature. Above them, the stars stretched endlessly, unburdened by city lights. Mara leaned against the familiar wooden railing, sipping her lemonade as Lucas stood beside her. "This place really is something," he murmured, his voice reverent. Mara smiled softly, her answer simple. "It's home." Lucas glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think I'll ever really—" Lucas hesitated. "Do you think I'll ever really fit in here?" Mara turned to him, a flicker of mischief and warmth in her eyes. "You? The guy who took down Thomas Price and got half the town cheering? You're already halfway there." Lucas chuckled softly, setting his glass down on the railing. "You know, I used to think success was measured in deals closed and numbers on a screen." He gestured toward the town below. "But here, it's different. It's about people, about community." Mara's chest tightened, her defenses so carefully built softened with every word. "You're not as much of an outsider as you think, Lucas." She met his gaze. "You've earned your place." Lucas held her stare, something unspoken lingering between them. "And with you?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes serious. She hesitated, then turned to face him fully. "With me, you've earned a chance. Just don't waste it." A smile broke across Lucas's face, one of relief, of gratitude. "I won't." For a moment, they simply stood there, the vast sky stretching above them, the quiet town nestled below. Then, Lucas reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. Mara didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers intertwine with his, a simple gesture, but one that meant everything. Together, they gazed out over Willow Creek, the future stretching ahead of them like the endless stars above. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Mara felt certain. They could face it. United. In love, in purpose, and in the quiet strength they had found in each other. In the distance, faint laughter and music drifted up from the garage, carrying on the heartbeat of the town. Life in Willow Creek continued, steady, strong, unshaken. And for Mara and Lucas, it was only the beginning.